The elevator's metallic hum had become my meditation soundtrack over the past 3 years. 42nd floor, executive suite, where Manhattan's skyline pressed against floor-to-ceiling windows like it was trying to get in. I'd learned to read the city's mood through those windows. Gray meant rain. Gold meant Marco was closing a deal. Red meant someone was about to lose everything they owned. Today the light was amber. Dangerous territory. My fingers flew across the keyboard, reconciling tomorrow's logistics for the Singapore acquisition. Marco Torres didn't accept excuses, only solutions. 3 years as his executive assistant had taught me to anticipate problems 6 moves ahead, like chess, but with federal investigations and international smuggling routes disguised as legitimate shipping manifests. I didn't ask questions about the discrepancies I noticed in the paperwork. I just made sure the numbers aligned perfectly. The alibis were airtight, and Marco's calendar never showed him anywhere near the actual crime. The office smelled like leather and expensive coffee, undertones of sandalwood from whatever cologne Marco wore that probably cost more than most people's car payments. I'd stopped comparing his world to mine about 2 years ago. Useless exercise. Better to focus on what I could control: schedules, damage control, and the careful architecture of professional distance. My phone buzzed. Personal line. I glanced at the time, 6:47 p.m. Marco had left for a meeting downtown an hour ago. The floor was empty except for Miguel in security, and maybe someone from accounting 2 floors down. I answered without checking the caller ID. Hello? Lara, finally. You never pick up anymore. Javier. My ex-boyfriend's voice hit like cold water. We'd dated for 8 months, 2 years ago. He'd wanted commitment. I'd wanted to not date someone who thought ambition in a woman was intimidating. The breakup had been civil. His continued attempts to reconnect were less so. I've been busy, Javier. What do you need? Need? Can't I just call to see how you are? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the one Marco had ordered, after noticing I'd been rubbing my lower back during a 14-hour contract review session. You can. You did. I'm fine. Was there something else? You're always so cold now. His voice carried that wounded puppy tone that used to make me feel guilty. Now it just made me tired. That job changed you. You used to be warm, spontaneous. I used to be broke and desperate for validation from men who couldn't handle that I'm smarter than them. The words came out sharper than intended, but I didn't take them back. 3 years of watching Marco dismantle billion-dollar corporations before lunch had recalibrated my tolerance for mediocrity. See? This is what I mean. You've become hard. Like you've forgotten how to feel anything. I rolled my eyes at my reflection in the darkened window. Javier, I'm at work. If you called to psychoanalyze my emotional availability, I'll need to bill you at my hourly rate. I'm trying to reach out here, baby. Who are you calling baby? The words escaped before I could stop them, dripping with the kind of acidic amusement I usually reserved for incompetent lawyers trying to intimidate Marco. The nickname felt presumptuous, intimate in a way we'd never actually been. Like he was claiming territory he'd never owned. Silence on the other end. Then Javier cleared his throat. It's just an expression. It's a bad habit. I'm not your baby. I'm not anyone's baby. I'm a 24-year-old woman with a career and zero interest in revisiting a relationship that ended because you couldn't handle dating someone with ambition. I heard movement behind me. The subtle displacement of air that meant someone had entered the executive suite without announcement. My spine straightened automatically, professional mask sliding into place even before I turned. Marco stood in the doorway of his private office, completely still. He wore charcoal slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie discarded somewhere between the building entrance and here. Dark hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. His eyes, that particular shade of brown that could freeze or burn depending on his mood, were locked on me with an intensity that made my pulse jump. How long had he been standing there, I have to go, I said into the phone, not looking away from Marco. Don't call this number again, Javier. I mean it. I ended the call before he could respond, setting my phone face down on the desk with deliberate calm. Marco hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. Mr. Torres. My voice came out steady, professional. I didn't hear you return. The Singapore contracts are ready for your review, and I've scheduled the morning briefing for 7 a.m. instead of 8 to account for the time zone difference with... Who was that? His voice was soft, dangerously soft. The tone he used when someone had made a very expensive mistake and he was deciding whether to destroy them quickly or slowly. Personal call. I apologize for taking it during work hours, even though it's technically after 6 and I'm not on the clock. I didn't ask for an apology. He stepped further into the main office, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed in a way that somehow made him more threatening. I asked who it was. I met his gaze directly. 3 years had taught me that looking away was interpreted as weakness. No one important. Important enough to call you baby. The word sounded wrong in his mouth, like he was tasting something distasteful. Important enough to have your personal number. An ex-boyfriend who doesn't understand the concept of boundaries. I turned back to my computer, pulling up the Singapore files. It won't happen again. I'll block his number. Marco moved to my desk, close enough that I could smell the sandalwood cologne, see the slight stubble along his jaw that meant he'd been working since before dawn. How long were you together? The question surprised me. Marco Torres didn't ask about personal lives. He paid attention to competence, loyalty, and discretion. Everything else was irrelevant. 8 months, 2 years ago. It ended amicably until about 6 months ago, when he decided we made a mistake breaking up. I kept my tone neutral, factual. I've been ignoring his attempts to reconnect. Today I was less polite about it. I noticed. Something flickered in his expression. Almost amusement, but darker. You have a sharp tongue when you're not being professional. Only when someone deserves it. I pulled up the contract summary. The Singapore deal closes in 48 hours. Legal flagged clause 17 about arbitration jurisdiction. I took the liberty of researching case precedents in international maritime law and drafted 3 alternative phrasings that protect our interests without triggering their regulatory concerns. I watched him process the subject change. Most people would have pushed, demanded more answers about the phone call. Marco studied me for a long moment, then shifted his attention to the screen. Show me. For the next 30 minutes, we worked through the contracts like the phone call had never happened. Marco asked precise questions, testing my understanding of the legal framework. I'd learned early that he valued competence above ego. If I could defend my reasoning, he'd listen. If I couldn't, he'd dismantle my argument and teach me to do better. It was one of the things I respected most about him. He never underestimated me because I was young or female. He pushed me harder than anyone ever had, and somehow made me want to rise to the challenge. This clause. He pointed to a subsection I'd highlighted. Why did you restructure the payment schedule? Their primary investor has exposure to maritime shipping lanes that overlap with our Southeast Asian operations. If we maintain annual payments, we're locked in for 3 years. Quarterly installments give us flexibility to exit after the first year if their investor's portfolio becomes unstable. Plus, I pulled up a secondary document. It improves our cash flow and lets us catch financial problems faster. He leaned against my desk, arms crossed, watching me with that unsettling focus. You research their investor's portfolio. I research everything that could impact your business, Mr. Torres. That's my job. Your job is to manage my schedule and handle correspondence. My job is to make sure you don't walk into situations blind. I met his eyes steadily. Whether that's a scheduling conflict or a hidden liability in a 9-figure acquisition. You hired me to notice patterns. I noticed patterns. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. You do. The acknowledgement felt significant in a way I couldn't name. Marco didn't give praise easily. Recognition from him was earned through months of proving yourself indispensable. Implement your recommendations. He straightened from the desk. Schedule the call with Singapore for tomorrow at 6 a.m. I want you on it. Of course. Anything else? He was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. This ex-boyfriend. Is he going to be a problem? The question caught me off guard. No, I handled it. You sounded angry, not scared, not uncomfortable. Angry. His tone was contemplative, like he was solving a puzzle. He hurt you. It wasn't a question. I considered lying, maintaining professional distance. But something in Marco's stance, the way he was watching me with complete attention, made honesty feel safer than deflection. He didn't hurt me. He disappointed me. I chose my words carefully. He wanted me to be smaller, quieter, more convenient. When I refused, he decided I was the problem. Now he's rewritten history to make himself the victim of my ambition. Understanding flickered across Marco's face. Men like that are dangerous, not because they're violent, but because they poison everything they touch with their inadequacy. The observation was sharp, accurate, and completely unexpected from a man who'd never shown interest in my personal life before. I can handle Javier, I said quietly. I've handled worse. I know you can. Marco moved toward his private office, then paused at the threshold. But if he escalates, you tell me, immediately. It was a command, not a request. I should have bristled at the presumption, the implication that I needed protection. Instead, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. Understood, Mr. Torres. He nodded once and disappeared into his office, door closing with a soft click. I sat in the sudden silence, staring at the contracts on my screen without seeing them. Something had shifted in the past 30 minutes. Something subtle but fundamental. Marco Torres had heard me call out someone's presumption, had listened to my anger, and instead of dismissing it as emotional or unprofessional, he'd recognized it as justified. More than that, he'd offered protection without demanding submission. My phone buzzed. A text from Carmen, my friend from college who now worked in corporate law across town. Drinks tonight? You sound stressed. I smiled despite myself. Carmen could read my mood through text messages, a skill that had saved my sanity more times than I could count. Rain check? Still at the office. We'll explain later. Her response was immediate. Your boss still doesn't understand labor laws? Tell Marco Torres I'll sue him for workplace violations. I laughed quietly, the sound echoing in the empty suite. If only Carmen knew how complicated my relationship with my boss actually was. Professional, certainly. Respectful, usually. But lately, something else had been creeping into our interactions. A tension I couldn't name, built from 3 years of late nights, high-stakes decisions, and the kind of trust that only came from watching someone navigate impossible situations with grace. The intercom on my desk crackled. Lara. I pressed the response button. Yes, Mr. Torres. Tomorrow morning. Come in at 6 instead of 7. I want to review the Singapore strategy before the call. Of course. Anything specific you want me to prepare? A pause. Just be ready to defend your recommendations. I'm going to test every assumption. I smiled at the challenge in his voice. I'd expect nothing less. The intercom clicked off. I gathered my things, shut down my computer, and headed for the elevator. The amber light from earlier had deepened to red, painting the city in shades of warning and possibility. As the elevator descended, I replayed the conversation with Javier in my mind. The moment I'd said, "Who are you calling, baby?" with that sharp edge of contempt. The moment I'd looked up to find Marco watching me with an expression I still couldn't decipher. Something told me that phone call had changed more than just my relationship with my ex. It had shifted something between me and the man who'd been my boss for 3 years. The man who noticed when my back hurt, who pushed me to be better, who offered protection without demanding anything in return. The man who'd heard me defend myself and looked at me like he was seeing something new. I stepped out into the Manhattan night, the city's noise wrapping around me like familiar chaos. Tomorrow morning would come early. Marco would test my work, challenge my assumptions, make me prove I deserved the trust he'd placed in me. And for the first time in 3 years, I wondered if our professional relationship was still the right word for what we were building. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something I didn't have a name for yet. The Singapore call went flawlessly. Marco had grilled me for 45 minutes beforehand, testing every clause, every contingency, every potential weakness in my analysis. By the time we connected with the acquisition team at 6 a.m., I could recite maritime arbitration precedents in my sleep. He'd nodded once when I finished presenting the restructured payment schedule. From Marco Torres, that single nod was equivalent to a standing ovation. Now, 3 days later, I was starting to notice things that made my carefully maintained professional distance feel less secure. Marco had always been present in the office. He built an empire through obsessive attention to detail. But this was different. He appeared in the main suite more frequently, asking questions about projects he'd normally handle through email. He stayed later, working from his desk instead of disappearing to the penthouse apartment he maintained 12 floors above us. And he watched me. Not obviously, not inappropriately, but with the same focused intensity he usually reserved for hostile negotiations. I pretended not to notice. Noticing meant acknowledging, and acknowledging meant confronting something I wasn't ready to name. Carmen met me for lunch on Thursday, her sharp eyes cataloging my appearance the moment I slid into the booth at our usual cafe. "You look tired." "I'm always tired. Comes with the job." I accepted the coffee she'd already ordered for me. Black, no sugar, the way I'd learned to drink it during all-nighters in college. "You look stressed tired, not just exhausted tired. What's going on?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Is Torres being an asshole?" Because I meant what I said about suing him. I smiled despite myself. Carmen was 5'2" of righteous legal fury, always ready to weaponize her law degree on behalf of people she loved. He's not being an asshole. He's being, I don't know, present. Present? What does that mean? I struggled to articulate the shift. You know how he usually operates. Everything through email or brief in-person directives, very efficient, very distant. Lately he's been in the main office more, asking about my opinions on things that aren't strictly my job. Staying late. Carmen's eyebrows rose. "Lara, please tell me you're not developing feelings for your terrifying mob boss." "He's not a mob boss, he's a—" I stopped, because we both knew exactly what Marco Torres was. "And I'm not developing feelings. I'm observing a change in behavioral patterns." "Right. Observationally." She sipped her latte, studying me. What happened to trigger this change? I told her about the phone call with Javier, leaving out the part where Marco had overheard. Now, sitting across from my oldest friend, I couldn't maintain the omission. He heard me tell Javier off, the night he called. I traced the rim of my coffee cup. Marco came back to the office unexpectedly. I didn't know he was there until after I'd basically eviscerated my ex for calling me baby. Carmen's expression shifted from concern to fascination. And then what? And then Marco asked who I was talking to, got very quiet when I mentioned an ex-boyfriend, told me to inform him if Javier became a problem. Holy shit. Carmen sat back, processing. Torres offered to handle your ex? That's not normal boss behavior, Lara. That's possessive behavior. It's protective, not possessive. There's a difference. Is there? With a man like him? She kept her voice low, aware that Manhattan's business district was a small world. Marco Torres doesn't do anything without calculating the cost-benefit analysis. If he's offering protection, he's establishing ownership. The word made my stomach clench. I'm not some territory to be claimed. I know that. Does he? I didn't have an answer. The past 3 years had been built on clear boundaries. Employer and employee, strategist and executor, power and competence existing in separate spheres. If those boundaries were shifting, I needed to understand why before I decided whether to reinforce them or let them dissolve. Just be careful, Carmen said gently. Men like Torres don't show interest without reason. And when they want something, they don't ask permission. They rearrange the world until resistance becomes impossible. Her words echoed in my head as I returned to the office. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than usual, anticipation building in my chest like static electricity before a storm. Miguel, the head of security, greeted me with his usual professional nod. But something in his expression was different, more watchful, like he'd received new instructions about my safety. I filed the observation away and headed to my desk. Marco's office door was closed, voices audible through the soundproofing. He was on a call. I pulled up the afternoon's agenda. Contract review at 2, conference call with the legal team at 4, dinner meeting with a potential investor at 7. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Lara Flores. Ms. Flores, this is Javier Ramirez calling on behalf of... The voice was professional, formal, not Javier's at all. My pulse spiked. Who is this? I represent Mr. Ramirez's interests in a personal matter. He's asked me to convey that he'd like to meet with you to discuss. I ended the call, hands steady despite the anger flooding my system. Javier had hired someone to contact me. Escalation disguised as professionalism, exactly the kind of manipulation I'd learned to recognize working for Marco. The intercom crackled before I could decide my next move. Lara, my office. Marco's tone was carefully neutral, which meant he was anything but calm. I grabbed my tablet and crossed to his door, knocking twice before entering. He stood at the windows, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense beneath the expensive fabric of his suit jacket. Close the door. I obeyed, staying near the entrance. Is everything all right with the legal call? I can reschedule if... Someone just tried to contact you from an unknown number. Not a question. A statement of fact that confirmed my suspicion. Miguel had been instructed to monitor my calls. How did you know that? Marco turned to face me, expression unreadable. I had your office line flagged for unusual activity after you mentioned your ex might be persistent. Standard security protocol. Standard protocol is monitoring external threats to the company, not my personal phone calls. I kept my voice level despite the intrusion. You're tracking my communications. I'm protecting my interests. His gaze was steady, unapologetic. You have access to information that could dismantle everything I've built. That makes you valuable. That makes you vulnerable. That makes you my responsibility. The possessive language Carmen had warned me about, wrapped in logic I couldn't completely dismiss. Marco was right. I knew things that federal prosecutors would kill to learn. My safety was connected to his security. But that didn't explain the intensity in his voice when he said, my responsibility. The call was from someone claiming to represent Javier, I said, choosing transparency over indignation. Professional tone, formal language, asking to schedule a meeting on his behalf. I ended it immediately. Marco's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He hired someone to bypass your rejection. That's not persistence, Lara. That's strategy. I'm aware. I worked through his playbook 2 years ago. He gets other people to fight his battles so he can maintain the nice guy image. I moved further into the office, setting my tablet on his desk. I can handle this. It's manipulation, not violence. Manipulation is a form of violence. Marco's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. It's just slower, and men who hire proxies to corner women who've rejected them don't stop until they're stopped. The protectiveness in his tone was unmistakable now, no longer hidden behind professional justification. I should have found it overbearing, controlling. Instead, I felt something else entirely. The warm certainty that someone powerful was choosing to use that power on my behalf, not against me. What do you suggest? I asked quietly. Marco studied me for a long moment, something calculating shifting behind his eyes. How would you feel about attending tomorrow night's investor dinner with me, as my guest, not my assistant? The proposal hung between us, weighted with implications I couldn't fully parse. You want me to pose as your date to scare off Javier? I want you visible at my side in a context that makes your unavailability unambiguous. He moved closer, stopping just inside my personal space. Men like your ex respond to one thing: demonstration that you're under someone else's protection. Someone they can't challenge. That's archaic and possessive, and I stopped myself, because it was also practical and would probably work. And effective. Yes, no apology in his tone. Is that a problem? I should have said yes. Should have insisted on handling Javier myself. Maintained the professional boundaries that had kept my life compartmentalized and safe for 3 years. Instead, I heard myself say, "What should I wear?" Something flickered in Marco's expression. Satisfaction, maybe. Or relief. Something that makes it clear you're not available for negotiation. I'll send options to your apartment this evening. You know my address. I know everything about you, Lara. Where you live, where you studied, your coffee order, the fact that you volunteer teaching financial literacy at the community center on Saturdays. His voice was matter-of-fact, not threatening. I've known since before I hired you. Due diligence. The revelation should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like confirmation of something I'd suspected. Marco Torres didn't do anything without complete information. The investor dinner, I said, redirecting. What's the actual objective? Beyond making a statement about my relationship status. His mouth curved slightly. The objective is securing a partnership with someone who controls shipping routes I need for the Jakarta expansion. The secondary objective is ensuring your ex-boyfriend understands that pursuing you carries consequences he won't enjoy. And the tertiary objective? Marco's smile widened, showing teeth. Seeing if you're as good at reading corporate predators in person as you are at analyzing them on paper. A challenge. Of course it was. Marco never offered anything without testing whether I'd rise to meet it. I'll be ready, I said. But I'm choosing my own dress from whatever options you send. And I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. If this investor is important, you need my actual analysis, not me playing arm candy. I'd expect nothing less. He returned to his desk, dismissing me with the gesture. 6 p.m. pickup tomorrow. Miguel will drive us. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Marco? He looked up, and I registered the fact that I'd used his first name without the Mr. Torres formality. His expression shifted slightly, acknowledging the intimacy of it. Thank you, I said quietly, for not making me feel weak for accepting help. His gaze held mine, intense and unwavering. You're not weak, Lara. You're strategic. There's a difference. I nodded and left before the moment could deepen into something I wasn't ready to examine. Back at my desk, I pulled up the afternoon's work, but my mind kept returning to tomorrow night. Dinner with Marco Torres. Not as his assistant, but as his guest. As someone under his protection, visible at his side in a way that would send a message to everyone watching. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like stepping into deeper water. Dangerous, yes, but also exhilarating in a way I'd been denying for longer than I wanted to admit. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Looking forward to our meeting. Javier sends his regards. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Marco with a single line. Your point about escalation appears accurate. His response came within seconds. Tomorrow night. Be ready. I deleted Javier's proxy's message and blocked the number. Then I pulled up the Jakarta expansion files and lost myself in the work, ignoring the anticipation building in my chest. Tomorrow night, the boundaries would shift again, and this time, I was choosing to let them. The dress arrived at 5 p.m. in a garment bag from a designer whose name I recognized from fashion magazines I couldn't afford. I opened it in my apartment, expecting something overtly sexual or deliberately flashy. The kind of costume men like Marco usually draped on women they wanted to display. Instead, I found an emerald silk dress, elegant and understated, with a neckline that suggested rather than revealed. Sophisticated without being matronly, expensive without screaming its price tag. The kind of dress that said the woman wearing it didn't need to prove anything, because her presence was statement enough. He'd chosen well. Damn him. Carmen appeared at my apartment at 5:30, armed with makeup and opinions. I'm still not sure this is a good idea. Noted. I stepped into the dress, turning so she could zip me up. But it's happening anyway. At least let me make sure you look intimidating. She studied my reflection critically. You're walking into a room full of people who'll assume you're decoration. We need to make sure they realize their mistake quickly. By 6 p.m., I looked like someone who belonged at Marco's side. Hair swept into a low twist, makeup emphasizing my eyes, the dress moving like water when I walked. Carmen had added my grandmother's gold necklace, the only expensive thing I owned, inherited from the woman who'd taught me that elegance was about confidence, not cost. Miguel arrived exactly on time, his professional nod carrying a hint of approval. Ms. Flores, you look very nice. Thank you, Miguel. I followed him to the elevator, nerves and anticipation warring in my chest. Has Mr. Torres mentioned what to expect tonight? He said you'd handle yourself well. Miguel's tone was carefully neutral, and that anyone who underestimated you would regret it. The vote of confidence settled something in my chest. Marco believed I could navigate his world. Now I just had to prove him right. The car was waiting at street level, not the usual black sedan, but something lower, sleeker, expensive in a way that drew stares. Marco sat in the back, reviewing something on his tablet, dressed in a tailored black suit that made him look even more dangerous than usual. He glanced up when I slid in beside him, and something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. Like he was seeing something he'd suspected, but hadn't confirmed until this moment. You look incredible. His voice was low, genuine. None of the performative flattery I'd learned to expect from men trying to impress. The dress is beautiful. Thank you for sending options. I settled into the seat, adjusting the silk around my legs. Though I'm curious why you chose this one specifically. Because it's the only one that looked like something you'd choose for yourself. He set aside the tablet, attention fully on me now. I want them to see you, Lara. Not a costume I dressed you in. The honesty disarmed me more than manipulation would have. Tell me about tonight. The real objectives, not the sanitized version. Marco's mouth curved slightly. Direct as always. He shifted to face me more fully. The investor is Diego Hernandez. He controls shipping routes through the Pacific that I need for the Jakarta expansion. He's also traditional, conservative, and responds better to people who present as settled and stable. Showing up with a beautiful, intelligent woman signals that I'm not just a ruthless businessman. I'm capable of partnership, compromise, building something beyond pure profit. So I'm a prop in your performance of humanity. No accusation in my tone, just observation. You're proof that I'm more than what people assume. He reached over, adjusting a strand of hair that had escaped my careful styling. The gesture was intimate, familiar, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. And if Diego mentions you to the right people, word gets back to your ex that pursuing you means crossing me. 2 objectives, 1 evening. Efficient. I studied his face, looking for the calculation I'd learned to read in 3 years of working together. What do you need from me specifically, beyond looking decorative and discouraging Javier? I need you to be exactly who you are. His hand dropped from my hair but stayed near, not quite touching. Read the room. Tell me what you notice about Diego's reactions, his body language, the moments where he's being genuine versus performing. You see patterns I miss. I need those insights. Trust. He was giving me real responsibility, not just asking me to smile and stay silent. The realization made something in my chest expand. What if I contradict you in front of him? I asked. What if my read suggests you're making a mistake? Then you tell me, politely but directly. Marco's expression was serious now. I value your judgment, Lara. If you think I'm wrong about something, I need to know. Especially if it's in the middle of a negotiation. The elevator reached the restaurant, top floor of a building in Midtown, the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance, and the staff recognized power on site. Miguel opened the car door, and Marco emerged first, extending his hand to help me out. I took it, the contact sending awareness sparking up my arm. His hand was warm, calloused in unexpected places. Evidence that Marco Torres hadn't always been the man in the expensive suit, that he'd built his empire with his own hands before delegating the violence. The restaurant's interior was all dark wood and soft lighting, designed to make conversations feel intimate even in a room full of people. Diego Hernandez waited at a corner table, rising as we approached. He was older than Marco by a decade, silver threading through dark hair, dressed in a suit that spoke of old money rather than new acquisition. Marco, punctual as always. Diego's smile was professional, his gaze shifting to me with polite curiosity. And you've brought a guest. How delightful. Diego Hernandez, meet Lara Flores. Marco's hand settled at the small of my back, possessive but not controlling. Lara is my executive assistant and, more recently, someone whose company I find indispensable. I extended my hand, meeting Diego's eyes directly. Mr. Hernandez, it's a pleasure. Marco speaks highly of your logistics network. Diego's handshake was firm, assessing. Does he now? And what do you do as his executive assistant, besides look beautiful? The condescension was subtle, delivered with a smile. I felt Marco tense slightly beside me, but I responded before he could intervene. I keep Mr. Torres from making expensive mistakes. My tone was light, pleasant, with an edge of steel underneath. Like, for instance, the shipping route through the Malacca Strait that your company proposed last month. Beautiful on paper, but it passes through waters with a 23% higher piracy risk than the northern alternative. The insurance premiums alone would have negated any efficiency gains. Diego's expression shifted from patronizing to genuinely interested. You reviewed our proposal? I review everything that crosses Mr. Torres's desk. Due diligence is part of my job description. I smiled, taking the seat Marco held for me. Though I admit, I find the logistics fascinating. Maritime law is endlessly complex. The dinner progressed exactly as Marco had predicted. Diego tested us both, asking pointed questions about the Jakarta expansion, probing for weaknesses in Marco's strategy, watching our dynamic to gauge the authenticity of our relationship. I played my role perfectly. Engaged but not domineering, offering insights when relevant, reading Diego's reactions and cataloging them for later analysis. When Diego made a subtle dig at Marco's age, I deflected with a story about Marco outmaneuvering a competitor twice his age and 3 times his resources. When he questioned the viability of expanding into Southeast Asian markets, I pulled statistics from memory, demonstrating knowledge that made it clear I wasn't just decoration. By the time dessert arrived, Diego was addressing me directly as often as he addressed Marco, treating me like an equal partner in the conversation rather than an accessory. "You're a remarkable young woman, Ms. Flores." Diego's tone carried genuine respect now. "Most assistants I meet are competent. You're strategic. I learned from the best." I glanced at Marco, allowing affection to show in my expression. Not performance, real warmth born from 3 years of watching him operate. Mr. Torres doesn't accept mediocrity. It raises the standard for everyone around him. Marco's hand found mine under the table, squeezing once. "Thank you," the gesture said. "You're perfect." The negotiation concluded over coffee. Diego agreed to the partnership terms Marco proposed, with one modification. He wanted quarterly reviews instead of annual, to ensure the relationship remained mutually beneficial. Marco had started to accept when I spoke quietly. "Semi-annual might be more practical, Mr. Hernandez. Quarterly reviews will generate significant administrative overhead for both companies. Semi-annual gives you oversight without drowning us both in paperwork." Diego considered this, then nodded slowly. "Semi-annual. That's acceptable." Marco's hand tightened on mine briefly. "Later," that pressure said. "We'll discuss this later." After Diego left, Marco and I remained at the table, the restaurant emptying around us. He studied me across the candlelight, expression unreadable. "You contradicted me." No anger in his voice, just observation. "You told me to if I thought you were making a mistake. Quarterly reviews would have been excessive given the scope of the partnership. Diego proposed it to test whether you'd accept unfavorable terms just to close the deal." I called his bluff. "And you were right." Marco signaled for the check. "You read him perfectly. How did you know he'd accept the counter?" "Body language. When he proposed quarterly, his left hand twitched slightly, a tell that indicates bluffing in most people. He expected pushback. Semi-annual was probably his actual goal from the start." Marco's smile was slow, genuine, transforming his usually controlled expression into something warmer. "You continue to surprise me, Lara Flores." "Good. Predictable assistants are easily replaced." I stood, accepting my coat from the waiting server. Did I fulfill the secondary objective? Making a statement about my availability? Perfectly. Diego will absolutely mention this dinner to his business associates. Word travels fast in our circles. Marco helped me into the coat, his hands lingering on my shoulders. "By tomorrow morning, anyone who matters will know you're under my protection." We descended to street level, where Miguel waited with the car. The ride back to my apartment was quiet, both of us processing the evening's performance. When we stopped outside my building, Marco walked me to the door despite Miguel's presence. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For tonight, for trusting me, for being brilliant. Thank you for seeing me as more than an assistant." The admission came easier than expected. For 3 years, I've been competent and invisible. Tonight you let me be visible. That matters. Marco's hand came up, cupping my face with unexpected gentleness. "You were never invisible to me, Lara. I've been watching you since the day I hired you, waiting to see if you'd realize how extraordinary you are." The confession hung between us, weighted with implications I wasn't ready to fully examine. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, the touch sending heat cascading through my system. "This is dangerous," I whispered. "What we're building." "I know." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "But I'm done pretending I don't want it." He kissed my forehead, chaste, restrained, nothing like what I suddenly found myself wanting, and stepped back. "Good night, Lara. Tomorrow we return to professional distance. But tonight, I wanted you to know the truth. I watched him return to the car, watched Miguel drive away, then let myself into my apartment on shaking legs. Carmen had texted 3 times, demanding updates. I ignored her, sinking onto my couch in the beautiful dress, still feeling the ghost of Marco's hand on my face. 3 years of careful boundaries, 3 years of professional distance, all of it crumbling because Marco Torres had decided to see me as more than his assistant. And the terrifying part was how much I wanted to let those boundaries fall. Javier's harassment stopped after the dinner with Diego. No more calls from unknown numbers, no more proxy contact attempts. Just silence that confirmed Marco's prediction. Word had traveled, and my ex-boyfriend had decided crossing Marco Torres wasn't worth whatever closure he thought he deserved. The professional distance Marco had promised lasted exactly 4 days. It started small. Coffee appearing on my desk in the mornings, exactly how I liked it. Miguel escorting me to and from the subway with increasing regularity. Marco's questions during briefings becoming more personal, less focused on work, and more interested in my opinions about things that didn't relate to business at all. "You read people remarkably well," he said one afternoon, watching me across his desk. "Where did you learn that skill?" I looked up from the contract I was reviewing. Necessity. When you grow up without money, you learn to assess people quickly. Who's safe, who's dangerous, who's pretending to be one when they're actually the other. Survival instinct, not training. Your family struggled financially. Not a question. He'd known since before hiring me. Due diligence. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. My father left when I was 6. I learned early that the world doesn't care about your circumstances. You either adapt or drown. I set down my pen, meeting his gaze. "Is there a point to this personal inquiry, or are you just curious?" "Both." Marco leaned back in his chair, studying me with that focused intensity. "I'm trying to understand how someone with your intelligence and strategic thinking ended up as an executive assistant instead of running her own empire." The question cut deeper than he probably intended. "Not everyone has the capital or connections to build empires, Mr. Torres. Some of us are too busy surviving to plan for conquest. You're brilliant enough to do both." His voice was soft but certain. "You could be running this company if you wanted to, so why don't you?" "Because I was 24 when I started working for you," I almost said. "Because I had student loans and rent and no safety net. Because building empires requires resources I didn't have. Instead, I said, maybe I'm building something, just slower and more carefully than you did." Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "What do you want, Lara? If resources weren't an issue, if you could do anything, what would you build?" The question felt dangerous, like he was offering something I shouldn't accept. But the genuine curiosity in his voice made honesty feel safer than deflection. "Financial literacy programs, for people like my mother, working multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet, getting exploited by predatory lenders because they don't understand interest rates or contract terms." I surprised myself with the passion in my voice. "I volunteer teaching basics on Saturdays, but it's not enough. I want to scale it, make real impact, help people avoid the traps that kept my family struggling." Marco was quiet for a long moment, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he stood, moving to the windows that overlooked Manhattan. "What if I funded it? Your program, full-scale operation, professional staff, multiple locations. You design it, I provide the capital." My heart lurched. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're right. You're building something. And I want to help you build it faster." He turned to face me. "Consider it an investment in something that matters more than profit margins." "Nothing matters more than profit margins to you, Marco. That's how you built all of this." I gestured at the office, the view, the empire he'd created. That was true. Until recently. His gaze held mine, weighted with meaning I wasn't quite ready to decode. Things change. Priorities shift. People become more important than percentages. The confession hung between us, impossible to ignore or dismiss. I stood, needing distance from the intensity of the moment. I need to think about this. It's a significant offer. Take all the time you need. The capital will be there when you're ready. Marco returned to his desk, the professional mask sliding back into place. The Jakarta expansion team arrives tomorrow. I'll need you in the morning briefing. I nodded and fled to my desk, heart pounding against my ribs. Marco Torres was offering to fund my dream. Not as charity, not as manipulation, as genuine support for something I cared about. Carmen's voice echoed in my head. When they want something, they rearrange the world until resistance becomes impossible. Was that what this was? Marco rearranging my life to make refusing him harder? Or was it something else entirely? 2 weeks later, the Jakarta expansion team had taken over the conference room, turning it into a war room of logistics and strategy. I coordinated schedules, managed communications, and watched Marco operate at full capacity, dismantling obstacles, building alliances, creating pathways where none had existed before. Late one evening, after the team had finally dispersed, I found Marco still in the conference room, studying shipping route maps spread across the table. He looked exhausted, tie discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "You should go home," I said from the doorway. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's presentation is already perfect." Nothing is perfect until it's executed. He glanced up, managing a tired smile. "Says the woman who's been here as long as I have." "I'm paid to be here." I moved into the room, gathering abandoned coffee cups. "You're the boss. You could delegate and leave." "I could, but I don't trust anyone else to get it right." He straightened, stretching his shoulders. "Except you. I trust you completely." The admission made my hands still. "Marco, I know. I'm blurring lines that should stay clear." He moved closer, stopping just inside my personal space. "But I'm tired of pretending I see you as just my assistant. Tired of acting like these past 3 years haven't been the most important relationship in my life." My breath caught. "We have a professional relationship. That's all this can be." "Why?" His voice was gentle but challenging. "Because I'm your employer? Because people might gossip? Because you're afraid of what happens when we stop maintaining distance? All of those reasons, none of them sufficient to explain the real fear, that if I let myself want this, want him, I'd lose the independence I'd fought so hard to build. That I'd become another woman whose identity got absorbed into a powerful man's orbit. I don't want to be your possession, Marco. I've worked too hard to be my own person. I don't want to possess you." His hand came up, cupping my face with devastating gentleness. "I want to stand beside you, support you, watch you build something extraordinary, and know I was part of making it possible. Not because you need me, but because you chose to let me in." The distinction mattered, more than I wanted to admit. "This is terrifying," I whispered. "I know." His thumb traced my cheekbone, the touch sending heat cascading through me. "But I'm done pretending I don't feel this. Done acting like you're replaceable when you're the most irreplaceable person in my life." I should have pulled away, should have reinforced boundaries, maintained professional distance. Instead, I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes against the intensity of the moment. "If we do this, if I let myself want this, you need to understand something. Anything. I won't shrink myself to fit your life. I won't become invisible or convenient or smaller. If you want me, you get all of me. The sharp edges, the opinions, the refusal to be controlled. Marco's laugh was soft, genuine. Lara, those are the parts I want most. He kissed me then. Not gentle, not tentative, but with the focused intensity he brought to everything he wanted. I kissed him back, 3 years of denied attraction flooding through me in a rush. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Come upstairs with me, to the penthouse, just to talk, just so we're not having this conversation in an office where anyone could walk in. I should have said no. Should have gone home, maintained distance, given myself time to think clearly. Instead, I nodded. Okay, but just to talk. His smile was knowing, like he understood I was lying to myself. Of course, just to talk. The penthouse was 12 floors above the office, accessed by a private elevator that required biometric identification. I'd never been here despite 3 years of working for Marco. It was his sanctuary, separate from the business empire. The space was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, art that was genuinely beautiful rather than expensive decoration. Books everywhere, evidence that Marco Torres read philosophy and history and poetry when he wasn't dismantling corporations. You're surprised, he said, watching me take in the space. I expected something more. Ostentatious. I moved to the windows, looking out at the city sprawled below us. This is actually beautiful. Personal. I have enough performances in my professional life. I wanted home, to be honest. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handing me one. You see the real version of me here. The one that exists when I'm not being the terrifying mob boss everyone fears. I accepted the wine, studying him in this new context. Softer somehow, more accessible. Still dangerous, but in a different way. Tell me about the offer to fund my program, I said. The real reason you made it. Marco settled onto the sofa, gesturing for me to join him. I sat, maintaining careful distance. Because watching you teach financial literacy on Saturdays, yes, I know about that, showed me who you are beyond the competence and strategy. You genuinely care about helping people avoid the traps you experienced. That matters to me. Why does it matter? Because I built my empire by exploiting those same traps. His honesty was stark, undefended. I loan money to people who can't afford the interest rates. I buy properties from families in foreclosure. I profit from others' desperation. And then, I watched you spend your free time trying to prevent that cycle, and I realized, I want to build something that helps rather than harms. Even if it's just one program. Even if it doesn't generate profit. The confession was more vulnerable than I'd ever heard him. You're trying to balance the scales. I'm trying to be worthy of you. His gaze was steady, unflinching. You see me clearly, Lara. You know exactly what I am, what I've done, and somehow you still choose to work beside me, to trust me. I want to deserve that trust. I set down my wine glass, processing the enormity of what he was offering. Not just capital for my program, but genuine partnership. Support without control. If I accept your funding, people will assume I'm sleeping with you for money. The reality felt important to acknowledge. Let them assume. You'll know the truth. That you're brilliant and deserving, and would succeed with or without my capital. I'm just accelerating the timeline. I studied his face, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda. Found only genuine desire to help me succeed. Okay, I said quietly. I'll accept your funding, on one condition. Name it. You let me design and run the program without interference. You're an investor, not a manager. I make the decisions about curriculum, locations, staffing. You trust me to execute my vision. Marco's smile was slow, approving. Done. I'll have the contracts drawn up this week. That was easy. Because I already plan to include that clause. I don't want to control your program, Lara. I want to make it possible. He shifted closer, closing the distance between us. Just like I don't want to control you. I want to make your life easier, safer, better in whatever ways you'll let me. His hand found mine, fingers interlacing. The contact sent awareness sparking through me. 3 years of denied attraction suddenly impossible to ignore. This is going to change everything, I whispered. I know. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. But I'm done pretending I don't want it to. I should have left then. Should have maintained boundaries for a little longer, given myself time to adjust to this new reality. Instead, I stayed. Talking through the night, sharing stories about our pasts, building something that felt more real than any contract or business arrangement. By the time dawn lightened the sky, I'd made my choice. I was all in, whatever that meant, whatever it cost. Marco Torres had rearranged my world until resistance became impossible. And I'd chosen to stop resisting. The financial literacy program launched 3 months later. 4 locations across the city, professional staff I'd personally selected, curriculum I'd designed based on my mother's experiences and my own. Marco had kept his promise. Funding without interference, support without control. The business press noticed. Articles appeared questioning why Marco Torres, known for ruthless profit maximization, was funding a non-profit that actively undermined predatory lending practices he profited from. The speculation intensified when reporters discovered I was both the program director and his executive assistant. "They're calling you my mistress," I said one evening, reading the latest article on my phone. We were in the penthouse, sharing takeout from the Thai place that had become our routine, suggesting the program is just expensive foreplay. Marco glanced up from his laptop, unperturbed. "Are they wrong about the mistress part?" "We're not." I stopped, because we were. Whatever label we used, the reality was undeniable. "We're colleagues who happen to be sleeping together. That's different." "Is it?" His smile was knowing. "You've spent the last 3 months in my bed more nights than your own apartment. Your coffee preference is programmed into my machine. I know you sleep on the left side and steal blankets. That sounds less like colleagues and more like something else." The observation made my chest tighten. We'd never discussed labels, never defined what we were beyond mutual attraction and genuine respect. But he was right. Somewhere in the past 3 months, we'd built something that looked remarkably like a relationship. "What do you want us to be?" I asked quietly. Marco closed his laptop, giving me his full attention. "I want you to move in here, officially. Stop pretending you live anywhere else when we both know you belong here." The presumption should have irritated me. Instead, I felt something warm settle in my chest. That's a significant step. We've already taken it. I'm just asking you to acknowledge the reality. He moved to where I sat, kneeling in front of me so we were eye level. "I want to wake up with you every morning. I want your things mixed with mine. I want to build something real instead of pretending this is casual, when we both know it hasn't been casual since the night you told Javier not to call you baby." The reference to that phone call, the moment everything changed, made me smile, despite the seriousness of the conversation. "You're very certain about this." "I'm certain about you. Everything else is logistics." His hands settled on my knees, warm and steady. "Move in with me, Lara. Let me take care of you the way you've been taking care of me for 3 years. I thought about my apartment, the cramped space I'd been maintaining out of principle more than necessity. Thought about the nights I'd spent here, the mornings waking up beside Marco, the way he'd integrated into my life so completely that separating felt artificial. "Okay," I said. "I'll move in. But I'm keeping my name on the lease for 6 months, just in case." "In case of what?" His voice was gentle, not offended. In case you get tired of me leaving coffee cups everywhere. In case I discover you have weird habits that drive me insane. In case this implodes and I need somewhere to retreat. The honesty felt important. I'm all in, Marco. But I'm also smart enough to have an exit strategy. His laugh was soft, approving. You wouldn't be you without contingency plans. Keep the apartment. I'll sleep better knowing you feel safe enough to leave if you need to. The understanding in his voice cracked something open in my chest. He wasn't trying to trap me or control me. He was giving me the freedom to choose him repeatedly, every day, without coercion. I love you, I said, surprising myself. The words had escaped before I'd consciously decided to say them. I know it's fast, and probably inadvisable given our professional dynamic. But I love you. Marco's expression transformed. The controlled mask he showed the world dissolving into something raw and genuine. I've loved you since the day you corrected my analysis of the Martinez contract and looked at me like you expected me to fire you for having the audacity to be right. You were terrified and defiant in equal measure, and I realized, this woman will either destroy me or save me, and I didn't care which as long as I got to keep watching her work. He kissed me then, deep and claiming and tender all at once. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, I was crying, happy tears that I didn't bother hiding. We're going to be terrible at this. I managed through the tears. We're both controlling and stubborn and terrible at compromise. Probably, but we'll be terrible together. He wiped my tears with his thumbs, cradling my face. And when we fight, and we will fight, we'll do it honestly. No manipulation, no games, just two people who refuse to shrink themselves trying to find a way to fit together anyway. The promise felt sacred somehow, more binding than any contract. I moved in the following week. Carmen helped, making pointed observations about how most of my belongings were already in Marco's penthouse. So we were really just transferring clothes and books. Miguel supervised the security aspects, ensuring my new home was as protected as Marco's office. By the time the last box was unpacked, I'd officially integrated into Marco Torres's life in ways that would have terrified me 6 months ago. But standing in our bedroom not his, watching Marco hang my grandmother's painting on the wall beside his expensive art collection, I felt certain I'd made the right choice. The certainty lasted exactly 3 weeks. I was leaving the Financial Literacy Center one evening when I noticed the car. Black sedan, tinted windows, parked across the street in a spot that gave clear line of sight to the entrance. Not unusual in Manhattan, except I'd seen the same car near the penthouse that morning. I pulled out my phone, taking a discreet photo before heading to the subway. Once underground, I texted the image to Miguel with a single line. Am I being followed? His response came within minutes. Stay on the subway. I'm tracking your location. We'll meet you at the 42nd floor. My pulse spiked, the certainty that something was very wrong flooding my system. I followed Miguel's instructions, taking the train to Midtown, then walking the 3 blocks to Marco's building with my hand on the pepper spray Carmen had insisted I carry. Miguel met me in the lobby, his professional mask not quite hiding the tension in his shoulders. The car is registered to a shell company. We're running it now. Mr. Torres wants you upstairs immediately. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. When the doors opened to the executive suite, I found Marco standing at the windows, phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying that dangerous softness that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. He ended the call when he saw me, crossing the space in 3 strides and pulling me against him. Are you okay? Did anyone approach you? I'm fine, just spooked. I leaned into his solid warmth, letting the fear drain away. The car was probably nothing. It wasn't nothing. Marco's arms tightened around me. The shell company traces back to Viktor Kozlov. He's a Russian businessman with interests that conflict with mine. We've been circling each other for months trying to gain advantage. My stomach dropped. He's using me as leverage. He's testing to see if you're a vulnerability I'll protect or an asset I'll sacrifice. Marco's voice was grim. Tomorrow I'm having this conversation with him directly. Make it clear that you're off limits. I can take care of myself, Marco. I don't need you fighting my battles. This isn't your battle, it's mine. He pulled back to look at me, expression fierce. Kozlov doesn't care about you personally. He cares about hurting me, and the fastest way to hurt me is through you. The reality of what I'd stepped into crystallized. Loving Marco Torres meant inheriting his enemies, meant becoming a target for people who saw me as nothing more than a tool to manipulate him. What do? I asked quietly. You let me handle it, and you trust that I'll do whatever necessary to keep you safe. His hand cradled my face, thumb stroking my cheekbone. I know that's hard for you, trusting someone else to protect you. But this is my world, Lara. Let me navigate it. I wanted to argue, to insist on maintaining my independence. But the fear still coursing through my veins made honesty win over pride. Okay, but you keep me informed. No protecting me by keeping me in the dark. Marco's smile was slight, but genuine. Deal. He kept his word. Over the next week, he briefed me on every development with Kozlov. The negotiations happening behind the scenes, the pressures being applied, the gradual shift toward resolution. Miguel increased security around me, but discreetly, maintaining my ability to move freely while ensuring I was never truly alone. The situation resolved when Marco gave Kozlov what he actually wanted, access to a shipping route that had been the real objective all along. The surveillance stopped. The threat evaporated like it had never existed. But the incident changed something between us. I understood now, viscerally, what it meant to be with someone whose empire attracted enemies. And Marco had seen my fear, my vulnerability, the parts of me that weren't strategic or controlled. I'm sorry, he said one night, holding me in the dark of our bedroom. I knew this life was dangerous. I should have warned you better, given you more choice about what you were stepping into. I chose you knowing exactly who you are. I turned to face him, our faces inches apart on the shared pillow. You've never hidden your world from me, Marco. I walked into this with open eyes. But knowing intellectually and experiencing directly are different things. His hand found mine under the covers, fingers interlacing. If you want to step back, create more distance for your own safety, I'll understand. I thought about the past 3 months, the financial literacy program thriving under my direction, the mornings waking up beside Marco, the way he'd supported my dreams while protecting my autonomy, the nights spent talking about everything and nothing, building something real in the spaces between power and vulnerability. I'm not stepping back, I said firmly. I'm stepping forward, all the way in, whatever that means. Marco's kiss was answer enough. Gratitude and relief and love woven together in the contact. We fell asleep tangled together, and I dreamed of a future where his dangerous world and my fierce independence somehow coexisted. It felt possible. More than possible. Inevitable. 6 months after moving in with Marco, I stood in the conference room presenting the financial literacy program's expansion proposal to his board of directors. Not as his girlfriend or assistant, but as the program director they were considering for additional funding. Marco sat at the head of the table, expression professionally neutral, but I caught the pride in his eyes when I fielded a particularly aggressive question from the CFO about return on investment. The ROI isn't measured in profit margins, I said calmly. It's measured in families who don't lose their homes to predatory lending, in people who understand their rights when signing contracts, in breaking cycles of financial exploitation that have persisted for generations. If that doesn't align with your investment philosophy, we can find funding elsewhere. The CFO bristled, but Marco's slight smile indicated I'd said exactly what he'd hoped I would. The board approved the expansion unanimously. After they dispersed, Marco pulled me into his office, closing the door behind us. You were magnificent. The CFO looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the logic to counter you. Because there isn't logic to counter. Either you believe some things matter more than profit or you don't. I set down my presentation materials, turning to face him. Thank you for letting me fight that battle myself. I know you could have shut down the questioning immediately. You didn't need me to. He moved closer, hands settling on my waist. You've never needed me to fight for you. You just let me stand beside you sometimes, which I appreciate more than you know. The past 6 months had taught us both the difference between protection and partnership. Marco had learned to give me space to handle my own challenges. I'd learned to accept help when I needed it, understanding that asking for support wasn't the same as surrendering autonomy. We'd found balance, imperfect, constantly negotiated, but real. There's something I need to tell you, I said, the words I'd been holding for 2 weeks finally ready to emerge. Something that changes everything. Marco's expression shifted, concern flickering across his features. Whatever it is, we'll handle it together. I pulled the small box from my pocket, the pregnancy test I'd taken that morning, the 3rd positive result in as many days. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. I wanted to be certain before telling you. He went absolutely still, staring at the test like it was written in a language he didn't understand. Then his gaze lifted to mine, and the emotion in his eyes made my throat tight. You're pregnant. Wonder and fear and joy tangled in his voice. We're having a baby. Yes. I know we never discussed this, never planned for it. If you need time to process. Marco kissed me, cutting off my rambling with the kind of kiss that rewrote every assumption about what he wanted, what we were building. When he pulled back, he was smiling, genuinely, unreservedly happy. I love you. I love that you're carrying our child. I love that our future just became more complicated and terrifying and perfect. His hand settled on my still flat stomach, protective and reverent. We're doing this, together. The certainty in his voice settled something in my chest. Together, with boundaries and negotiations and me maintaining my career and independence even after the baby arrives. I wouldn't expect anything less. He pulled me closer, resting his forehead against mine. We're going to be terrible parents. Both of us are too stubborn and controlling. Probably. But our kid will never doubt they're loved or protected or capable of building their own empire. I smiled against his lips. That's more than most children get. We told Carmen first. She screamed, then cried, then demanded to be godmother with a legal ferocity that made Marco laugh. Miguel heard through the security team and appeared at the penthouse with flowers and a quietly delivered, "Congratulations, sir. The baby will be lucky to have you both." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. I worked through the first trimester, managing both my role as Marco's assistant and the expanding financial literacy program. We hired someone to eventually take over my assistant duties, a competent woman named Sophia, who Marco trusted after my rigorous vetting process. By the 2nd trimester, I'd fully transitioned to running the program exclusively. The freedom to focus on work I genuinely cared about, supported by Marco's capital and connections, felt like a gift I'd never expected to receive. You're building an empire, Marco observed one evening, watching me review expansion plans for 6 new program locations. Your own kingdom of financial justice. I learned from the best. I looked up from the documents, studying the man who'd changed my life in ways I'd never anticipated. You taught me that power isn't about domination. It's about creating systems that work for you instead of against you. You were always capable of that. I just gave you resources to accelerate the timeline. He moved to sit beside me, his hand finding my rounded stomach with the gentle possessiveness that had become automatic. Have you thought more about what you want for after the baby arrives? We'd been navigating this question for weeks. I wanted to maintain my career, keep building the program, but I also wanted time with our child. Wanted to be present in ways my mother hadn't been able to be while working 3 jobs. I want a nanny, I said carefully. Someone I trust completely to help during work hours. But I want to be primary parent. I want our child to know me as more than someone who's always working. Marco nodded slowly. What if I stepped back, delegated more of the business operations, made space for both of us to be present parents? The offer surprised me. Marco Torres had built his empire through obsessive control of every detail. Delegating meant trusting others with decisions that could cost millions. You'd do that? Risk your business to be more present for our family? The business will survive, but I'll never get these years back with you and our child. His hand spread across my stomach, feeling the baby move beneath his palm. I've spent my entire life building towards something I thought would make me complete. Then I met you, and realized completion isn't about accumulation. It's about connection. About building something that matters beyond profit margins. I kissed him, pouring 3 years of love and trust and fierce partnership into the contact. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, I was crying again. Happy tears that had become embarrassingly common during pregnancy. We're really doing this, I whispered. Building a life together, raising a child, creating something real. We really are. Marco wiped my tears with gentle thumbs. And it terrifies me in the best possible way. The baby arrived on a Tuesday in April, 3 weeks early but healthy and perfect. Carmen was there, holding my hand through labor while Marco paced and demanded updates from the medical staff with the same intensity he brought to business negotiations. When the doctor finally placed our daughter in my arms, I looked down at her tiny face and felt the world realign completely. She's perfect, Marco breathed, settling beside me on the hospital bed, his finger gently stroking our daughter's cheek. Absolutely perfect. What should we name her? I asked, overwhelmed by the enormity of this tiny human we'd created. Marco was quiet for a moment, studying our daughter with absolute focus. Elena, after the woman who taught you that strength and grace aren't mutually exclusive. My grandmother's name. The woman who'd raised me to believe I deserved more than survival, that I was capable of building the life I wanted, instead of accepting the one circumstances handed me. Elena, I repeated, testing how it sounded. Elena Torres. Elena Flores Torres, Marco corrected gently. She should carry both our names, both our legacies. The compromise felt perfect. Our daughter would inherit my fierce independence and his strategic brilliance. She'd grow up knowing that power and kindness weren't mutually exclusive, that building empires meant nothing if you destroyed yourself in the process. Carmen visited that evening, bringing flowers and bossiness in equal measure. She's beautiful, and you both look exhausted. When's the last time either of you slept? What year is it? Marco asked dryly, making Carmen laugh. Miguel appeared with security updates disguised as congratulations. Sophia sent a gift basket and a message that the office was running smoothly in our absence. The financial literacy program staff sent a group card signed by every employee. By the time visiting hours ended, I was exhausted and overwhelmed, and more grateful than I'd ever been for the life I'd somehow built. We did good, I murmured to Marco as he held Elena, our daughter sleeping peacefully against his chest. She's going to change everything. She already has. He looked up, meeting my eyes across the hospital room. 3 years ago, I was a man who built empires alone and called it strength. Now I'm a father and partner learning that real strength is letting people in, asking for help, building something bigger than myself. I smiled through fresh tears. Who knew you were capable of personal growth? Who knew you'd be patient enough to wait while I figured it out? His answering smile was soft genuine, the expression he only ever showed me. I love you, Lara Flores. Thank you for choosing me even when I didn't deserve it. I love you too. Even when you're impossible and controlling and too stubborn to admit you're wrong. I'm never wrong, he said automatically, then laughed when I threw a pillow at him. Okay, sometimes I'm wrong, but only about small things. Like the Martinez contract revisions? That was 3 years ago. You're never letting that go, are you? Never. It's the moment I realized you were capable of listening. I shifted carefully, still sore from delivery. Come here, both of you. Marco settled beside me on the narrow hospital bed. Elena cradled between us. We lay there in comfortable silence, watching our daughter sleep, building something I'd never believed possible. A family that felt like home. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Inside, we created our own universe, small and perfect, and entirely ours. 6 months later, standing in the newly renovated office for the Financial Literacy Program's flagship location, I addressed a room full of people who'd come to celebrate the expansion. Marco stood at the back, Elena asleep against his chest in a carrier, watching me with quiet pride. 3 years ago, I was working 3 jobs and barely surviving, I said, my voice carrying clearly. I didn't believe in futures beyond the next paycheck. But someone saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Someone gave me resources and trust and space to build something meaningful. My eyes found Marco's across the room. This program exists because one person believed that some things matter more than profit, that helping people matters more than exploiting them. That building legacies isn't about accumulation. It's about impact. The applause was warm, genuine. Carmen stood in the front row, crying happy tears. Sophia managed the logistics with competent ease. Miguel supervised security with his usual professional demeanor. After the speeches and celebrations, Marco and I stood alone in the center, Elena still sleeping peacefully against him. Thank you, I said quietly. For all of this. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You would have built this anyway, Marco said with certainty. I just accelerated the timeline. You were always capable of extraordinary things, Lara. You just needed someone to give you the space to prove it. I leaned up to kiss him, careful not to jostle our sleeping daughter. We make a good team. The best team. His free arm wrapped around me, pulling me close. You, me, and this tiny human who's going to inherit both our stubbornness. God help the world. I laughed, resting my head against his shoulder. We're going to raise a terrifying child. Good. The world needs more terrifying women who refuse to be underestimated. Marco pressed a kiss to my hair. She'll have you as an example. She'll be unstoppable. We stood there in our empire of financial justice, our daughter sleeping peacefully between us, and I realized this was what winning looked like. Not domination or control, but partnership and trust, and building something meaningful together. Marco Torres had heard me defend myself on a phone call 3 years ago and decided I was worth protecting, worth supporting, worth loving in ways that made me stronger instead of smaller. And I'd chosen to love him back, the dangerous, brilliant, impossible man who'd rearranged his entire world to make space for mine. We'd built something real, something that would outlast both of us. Legacy measured in lives changed instead of profits accumulated. And standing there, surrounded by everything we'd created, I felt certain we'd only just begun.